This week we are doing an Ace Files video where I invite 3 different players to comment on a dogfight. The idea is that you will be able to learn from all 3 people and get different opinions based on their backgrounds. If this is your first time here, I focus on multiplayer sim gameplay, so if you're into that, please subscribe. This fight is set in the Cold War, and I think this will be an interesting one for both DCS and IL-2 players. I have sourced 3 different people, one with a heavy Soviet plane background, another one who primarily flies NATO aircraft, and lastly one with a heavy BFM background. So 3 very different opinions. I want to make one note and let you know that visibility is really tricky in DCS, and when you combine that with YouTube video compression, it gets tricky to see things. I have added a tac view and circles to highlight the plane. Please note that I do lose the bandit in some parts of this fight, and it's actually part of the video, so don't feel like you're losing track of things. It's just part of it, and you'll see how things play out. Let's meet our guests.
Hey everyone, Tempest here again. You can find me on Tempest7MR, that's Mike Romeo, on Twitch. Enigma has invited me here again today to do another dogfight review. This time it is a DCS dogfight review between, I believe, a Mig-19 and an F5E Tiger 2. I haven't actually watched this yet end to end, so this is going to be not only my review but also my first reaction to it. Again, big thank you to Enigma for having me back on the channel.
Hey everybody, DCS Sport here, and I'm back again for another commentary video. If you don't know who I am, I'm a real-world pilot who also likes video gaming and flight sims, and I like to create a little bit of content on both. Right now I'm working on a couple of videos, including one on why this is the right time to start flying DCS, so keep an eye out for that.
Hey guys, my name's Rossmum. I stream on Twitch under that name. I also have a YouTube channel, which I mostly use to upload my old Twitch VODs. There's a few other things on there too, a few extra videos here and there every once in a while. I've been playing Combat Flight Sim since I was about 10 years old. Started out with Microsoft Combat Flight Sim 2, European Air War, F-22 Total Air War, and Falcon 4, and it kind of built from there. I've had a few years off between then and now. I've been playing DCS for about the past 3 years though. I am seriously hooked on it. I mostly fly Cold War aircraft, primarily Soviet stuff, and if you're into that kind of thing, that's chiefly what I do. I do a little bit of IL-2 still as well, but Cold War is pretty much my deal these days. Right, so we're starting out at a reasonably high altitude for the Cold War server. Most fights on here take place on the deck. Looks like we've got a contact spotted off the nose. That looks like a missile shot, possibly? That's not going to track.
I see an F5 flaring. The F5's given away his position. I'm not quite sure why he felt the need to flare right there into the merge. The Mig-19 doesn't carry all aspect missiles.
Looks like the F5 attempted a front aspect missile shot. And for those of you that aren't aware, the birds of this generation, these early, late Korea, early Vietnam War type aircraft, have terrible missiles and seeker heads. So really the missiles employed by both the MiG and the F5 are rear aspect only. You can get lucky with a head-to-head shot, but it's usually not ideal. The MiG also doesn't have any flares it can use. So you saw the F5 pumping out some prophylactic flares in the merge there, but Enigma wisely holding onto his missiles because he knows they're probably not going to track.
Enigma goes straight over the top, which is probably what I would do as well. Now, the F5s are really hard to spot against the ground.
So both aircraft in a standard 2 circle
straight away. Enigma's going up in the vertical, the F5's coming downhill. This is a pretty good setup for the 19.
And Enigma cashing in his chips here, and we'll pause here for a sec. So you can see Enigma is coming down on the top of his circle. And I use this a lot in my dogfighting tactics. Like after that initial merge, I want to be aggressive. I'm trading my kinetic energy for potential energy so I can get early nose position on my opponent. It's a high-risk maneuver because if you mess up your shots initially, your opponent can end up above you and in that same position. So you really need to try to make your shots count, and you need to really be cognizant of how you're managing your energy, how you're managing that kinetic advantage, that speed. I see a lot of other players, they like to go low. They like to keep their speed throughout these terms, especially when you're in early, early warbirds or early Korean War or Vietnam era aircraft, because they're not as forgiving. Like, you're in a, F-15, F-14, whatnot. You could power through so much of so many mistakes that you really just can't get away with some of these earlier planes. That being said, when you dip low and you dump your nose that early, you're giving up the high ground. You're putting yourself at a propensity to potentially black out. And the one advantage you do have is you're able to, silhouette your opponent against the sky so you don't lose him in ground clutter, which I know Enigma has mentioned before, seems to be a little bit more difficult for the flat panel guys out there in DCS than it is in like IL-2. But that being said, I feel like you trade off a lot. I'd rather go for the high aspect, really cash in some of those chips, get some of that potential energy, and then come in over the top. You just have more advantage. You got more nose authority. You could get that energy back. You could get that speed back by dumping the nose. And it really prevents those fights that you might see some other channels demonstrate, where they both start high and then everyone dumps their nose and they end up on a deck just circling around each other. On the deck. You're really prolonging that. It keeps your options open, in my opinion. So I really like Enigma's maneuver here. He's already, and as you can see, he's already nose high. Like, he's got his nose on the F5. The F5 is still turning, and they've got about 1.4 nautical mile separation here, 1.3, and Enigma is aggressive. The F5 hasn't reacquired him yet, doesn't know. He still has to position his jet, and Enigma can take all this time to build up some speed and line up that gunshot.
Using every little bit of instantaneous turn rate the 19 will give him, and he actually keeps turning and stays above the F5, which is interesting, not really what I would do. So the situation we have here is, because Enigma has pulled around so hard it's a two-circle geometry to start with, but he's pulled around so hard, he's essentially turned it into another merge. The F5's pulling for everything he has. It's quite common on the Cold War server. People will just pull. And so we end up with a situation where they've gone through a complete two-circle with Enigma and the F5 opposed like this, and they both turn straight back into each other, and it looked like they were going to remerge for a moment there, but Enigma decided to stay above, which is a pretty smart decision. Rather than getting back into a neutral merge again, he's decided to hold his perch. The Mig-19 has a much better vertical performance than the F5, much better acceleration, much better thrust-to-weight ratio. As long as he stays above the F5, he can pretty much dictate the fight. So he started out with kind of a typical Cold War merge, one guy turns one way, the other turns the other way. Added a bit of verticality, which is quite common for guys flying MiGs. We like to harness our better thrust-to-weight ratio a bit. And then he kind of turned it on its head, turned it back into a remerge, and then turned it on its head again, and we end up with this perch situation. So this is quite an interesting setup, not what you'd be used to seeing.
Really quick again. So Enigma, noticing that the F5 is no longer maneuvering with respect to his aircraft. So the F5 looks like he might have lost him. Enigma, instead of going for a pure high-angle deflection shot, a pure pursuit to try to get that shot, now that the F5 is kind of lost and continuing this lazy turn, he's unloaded his aircraft, he's picking up knots, you can see. Enigma stays at that high position now. And again, this is one of the advantages when you go high. He's now sitting above him, and he's got this high position. He's able to sit above him, watch his opponent, and he's setting up for a lag pursuit. So he's crossed over him, and now he's using his angles, using the geometry to his advantage so that he can come around and swoop in over the top. So we'll watch what happens here.
So the F5 seems to be tumbleweed here. It looks like he lost sight of the MiG-19, so he's just keeping it low, doing some searching, but keeping his speed up a little bit. MiG-19 looks like he lost the F5 as well. The Syria map has a really dynamic texture sort of variation to it, so it's really easy to lose aircraft in the ground clutter. Alright, so the F5 makes a crucial mistake here. He got eyes back on the MiG, and then used his dogfight missile switch, which is dogfight forward, I believe, for missiles, to lock the aircraft's radar on the MiG-19. The MiG-19 has RWR. It's not very complicated, but it does let you know when you're being locked. MiG-19 would have no idea that a missile shot was on the way if the F5 would have just used a visual closure rate and targeting solution. Essentially, all you have to do is uncage the missile. You're rear aspect, so you're in a perfect firing position. You uncage the missile, you pull a little bit of lead if you need to, or you close the gap, and then you fire. And the Mig-19 would have had no idea the missile was on the way. Instead, by locking up the Mig-19, you've given them enough warning to that, hey, I'm getting locked up, I need to look around for where the threat is. And because the AIM-9P isn't a very maneuverable weapon, obviously it just misses here.
In the Cold War server, the F5 pilots, for whatever reason, really love to get radar locks. You've got a radar-controlled gun sight, and I don't know if this is just an aspect of the DCS community where everyone's so used to their toys and they just don't fly a lot of warbirds without gyro sights and all this other stuff. But all this F5 did right here, with 1.8 miles of separation, having that damn radar on just let Enigma know that he's been targeted. If he kept that radar off and goes into blower and just chases him down, he could probably have just thrown a Sidewinder up his tailpipe.
Radar warning, and he just pulls. Loses his missiles in the pull because he pulled the stick back so hard. He does reacquire the F5 visually here off the smoke trail, but in doing so he's lost his missiles, and he also gave the F5 that much more opportunity to attack him unseen. Generally, when I get shot down on Cold War, it's because there's somebody behind me that I never saw if I'm extending away from a fight. Typically it happens after you shoot someone down, his mate comes in and gets you when you're busy sort of, oh, I just killed somebody. So it's really risky. He got away with it here, but only just. The F5 did fire at him, but he was quick enough to react that the missile went stupid. So it was a really kind of a risky extension there. I get that the objective was to get the F5 somewhere he could see it. Right behind you is a good place to spot someone, but at the same time, if I was going to do that, I'd be going into maybe a vertical corkscrew or something.
Closer, but the MiG-19 pilot is doing a really good job of going into the vertical where it has more power than the F5. But the F5 is better at low airspeed, so the F5 pilot is trying to stay flat, keep the MiG-19 turning, and trying to get the MiG-19 slow.
He's still pulling quite hard, so the MiG-19's instantaneous turn performance is kind of okay. It's not bad, but it's not as good as the F5 or the MiG-21. Its sustained turn performance is better than either of them by a significant margin. So generally you want to keep your speed up and hit that sustained turn rate in the MiG-19, but it looks like Enigma's just getting a little bit carried away with the stick and he's bleeding off a little too much speed to do it. He's still got one missile attached at least, but you can see here again he's extended out.
But instead they've decided that they wanted to drag and keep this separation. They know that the F5 has no missiles, and so they can drag the F5 all day long and hopefully force a mistake.
So this is really unfortunate because this is twice Enigma's has won the BFM contest and has lost sight of his opponent. But the F5 again has also made critical mistakes. One, took a head-on shot, missed, and then took a second shot but alerted him with the radar warning.
Now, at the same time, because Enigma's using the vertical so much, even though he's bleeding off a lot of speed with these hard pulls, he's still leaving the F5 behind. The F5 really, it has a better instantaneous turn rate, it has a better nose authority, but it cannot maintain energy through these kinds of turns. So what we see here is kind of a repeat of the first merge, if you will, is that Enigma manages to tire out the F5, manages to waste its energy, so it starts losing distance and it opens out this gap, and then Enigma loses sight of the F5 because it's so small and he's got this massive distance between them. And then he's got to try and reacquire it, usually by intentionally giving it his tail, which again is legitimate, that's fine. You've just got to try and make sure you don't open that gap too much. So we can see here he's pretty much pure defensive against this F5. He's doing little rolls and jinks back and forth. I'd imagine mostly to try keep eyes on the guy, but they also do help with missile and guns defense, just to make sure the F5 doesn't have an easy tracking shot. Like with the MiG-19, that's the kind of shot you want in the F5, is just a nice, stable turning target that you can kind of sweep in behind, and get them at the apex of their turn. If you're constantly weaving back and forth, it makes it much more difficult.
If he had another missile here and he wasn't using his damn radar, Enigma would be dead. Like, this is a cold, he's got him dead to rights, easy missile shot.
Again, the importance of taking good missile shots is really coming into play here. There's been a few opportunities where the F5 had really good missile solutions, and if they would have held onto their missiles for more appropriate shots, they would have gotten a kill by now.
No opportunity as Enigma tightens down and then goes up in this over the top oblique again, and I've lost sight of the F5 in this maneuver. There he is. He's coming up onto 6 o'clock, so the F5 is staying with him, and Enigma is constantly looking around, trying to keep eyes on. So I'm going to pause here really quick. So you can see the F5 just above the canopy. It's kind of hard to see planes in the Mig-19 in my experience in your rear quarter, at least in VR. One of the key mistakes Enigma is making here, in my opinion, and I know he's using track IR, so spotting is definitely more difficult using a flat panel screen in track IR than it is in VR, at least in my opinion, is that he is frantically looking all over the place. You need to have better situational awareness and be cognizant of the feel of what your jet's doing. So you can see him glancing forward, glancing back, glancing forward, glancing back, and he's losing his opponent doing this stuff. He needs to get a feel in his peripheral of how fast the jet is, how the jet is performing, without having to glance at his gauges as often as he is. This constant panic sweep is just a recipe for losing eyes on your opponent. And he's winning the BFM, and sometimes it's trying to avoid terrain, so he doesn't want to hit the ground. At least it looks like, and other times, I don't know if it's a speed check or whatnot, but when you're high up like this, like you're coming up over the top and the F5 is below you, right? You're coming up over, the F5 is in lag pursuit and you're trying to whip around. I don't know why you're looking in front. I don't know why you're looking at your gauges unless you're worried about your airspeed. And if you are, there's really nothing to do about it. Feel the jet out, do a hammerhead, drop the nose, do what you got to do, pick up knots, unload the jet, like whatever it is, but keep your eye on the bandit.
His nose enough, and then he drops back in on him. F5's starting to kind of struggle here. He scissors back into Enigma. That's not really a kind of shot you want with the Mig-19. The guns are very powerful, but they're quite slow firing, and you don't have much ammo. I think it's like 80 rounds per gun. So those kinds of high aspect head-on crossing shots are not really ideal. You can make them, but you waste a lot of ammo doing it.
The gun sight in the MiG leaves a lot to be desired, in my opinion.
Okay, so now the MiG pilot's trying to just get a couple head-on shots. The F5 pilot's launching flares. I'm not sure why. I don't think they really understand what the MiG's offensive capabilities are. I think they think that the MiG has front aspect short range missiles, which it doesn't.
Now in this situation, I guess that's what Enigma felt he had to do to keep the pressure on the F5. Sometimes missed shots are better than no shots at all. It keeps the other guy on the back foot. But at the same time, he has to be conscious of how much ammunition he's using in these crossing shots, and whether he's allowing the F5 to kind of engineer a situation where there could be an overshoot. It's very risky in the Mig-19 because, again, you don't have the nose authority the F5 does. So if he pulls suddenly, you'll go shooting straight past him.
Trying to do something, but like again, I haven't flown the F5 much at all, so I'm by no means an expert, but I've flown the MiG against the F5, and I would not want to be the F5 in this scenario. He's just trying to pull into a rate fight again.
And again, he's launching flares. He's looking for a missile shot, but he's really not defending heavily against the guns. At this point, if I were the F5 pilot, I would get slow and force the overshoot on the MiG. Now,
Enigma has figured this out and is constantly going over the top. So you notice every time he gets close to the F5 and there's a risk of an overshoot, he goes up, which is the correct thing to do. The F5 will ideally want him to go level past him or want him to go down or cross his nose somehow, but as long as Enigma pulls back into the vertical every time he gets close to an overshoot, he should be safe from the F5.
As the F5 pilot, keep the turn going and try to keep wrapping it up tighter and getting the MiG slow. The MiG's wing does give up at slow airspeeds. The F5 has leading edge extensions, which does a really good job. F5 pilots count flares. I don't know why, dude. And okay, there we go. We got a really good gun shot on the F5. Interestingly enough, though, it looks like the pilot of the MiG took the stock ammo loadout for the guns, meaning I didn't see any explosions from high explosive. When you're choosing your loadouts, make sure, especially on the MiG, that you're choosing the HEIT, the high explosive incendiary tracer rounds for the 30 millimeters. You get a couple shots like that, and your opponent is going to get absolutely blown out of the skies. I think the MiG just hit the F5 with all AP rounds, which did damage, but just kind of passed through the whole airplane. So the fight has to continue, unfortunately. F5's in a bad position. They're slow. They have no real options. At this point, they're done, and they've despawned. So fight's over. Good fight. F5 blew a lot of really good opportunities, especially with that second missile shot by locking on with the radar. Again, lose sight, lose the fight. The F5 had every opportunity to win it, but the MiG pilot got a couple second chances and capitalized on it.
Because at this speed, the F5 just does not have the authority to pull its nose up for a shot. Right here, we're kind of saddling in. There's a chance here. Looks like just a little bit too much lead. And again, here comes a potential overshoot, but he's able to land some solid hits and then gets out of the way. You never want to cross in front of the guy's nose when you overshoot like that. And Enigma does a very good job of getting out of the way. And not only getting out of the way, but maintaining sight on the bandit and rolling back in for another shot. These displacement rolls that he's doing are pretty much your bread and butter in the Mig-19. When you're not two-circling somebody, this is what you do. You stay above them, swoop them, and after you finish each attack, you roll over the top and come in for another one. So here, the F5 stays low. He has been hit. There's no visible sign of damage on him, but there's a good chance he is pretty badly damaged. The 30mm on this hit like a truck. And Enigma's rolling in for another attack here when... right as he's about to take the shot, the F5 disappears. Now, one thing I will say, as that fight comes to an end, is that final shot lineup was a little bit risky. One thing you have to be aware of with the Mig-19, again, it's no MiG-21. It does let you pull the nose a bit, but it doesn't pull the nose as much as you may be expecting if you fly the F5 or the 21 a lot. And it's quite easy to be drawn into the trap against a low-altitude target who's very slow, like that F5 was, that you'll dive down on him and you just won't leave yourself enough room to pull out after you gun them. So you may get him on the way down, but you'll just go straight into the ground behind him. I see it happen quite a lot, especially with MiG-19s. They're quite prone to it. So it was a little bit of a risky shot. In the end, it wasn't needed anyway, but it is a bit risky to take really high aspect diving shots like that low to the ground. Overall, though, it was a pretty well-played fight. We saw some interesting and kind of unique to the MiG-19 situations there. So the way that he just played into the vertical every time, you won't really see F5s doing that because they don't have the power to do it. Whereas the MiG-19, that is what it's best at. It just has so much thrust, it can stay above somebody as long as you handle it right. So you have the option of two-circling and out-sustaining the F5, or you have the option of just going into the vertical and diving back down on it. The first time I ever fought a MiG-19 who knew what he was doing, that was what happened. It was horrible. There's nothing you can do against it. So he did a really good job of keeping that F5 somewhere where he can manage him at all times, either behind him where he knew where he was at least, or under him. You never want to get in a situation where the F5 is somewhere above you, because then it starts giving them options, whereas obviously the more altitude you have, the more speed you have, you're just going to hold all the cards, and there's not really much the F5 can do to retaliate against that. It just doesn't have the speed, it doesn't have the thrust, it doesn't have the acceleration. So it was a pretty good showcase there of just what the MiG-19 is capable of.
So summary of thoughts with that is that these engagements are interesting, especially in the Fox 2 missile engagements, especially early on when you don't have the high off-bore sight 9Xs or Archers. They're able to pull like crazy maneuvers and you're just able to stare at your target and let a weapon off. And they're even more interesting when you have like these mainly rear aspect missiles. When you're coming from a World War II, guns only type basic fighter maneuver environment, and you inject a weapon that can reach out and grab you at Mach 2 within a mile or two or so several 100 meters, like easily hundreds of meters, where gunshots like that really, like, you're like the 200 meters, 200 yards, 300 yards forward, maybe 500 at the most, like you're making some long range snapshots, or hope and pray to hit them at a huge distance. Like, these missiles just really change the game. Like, when you lose your advantage and you have to extend, and you notice what happened with Enigma is he lost sight, he started to extend. If that F5 didn't turn on his damn radar, like, Enigma's dead. Like, if he's in a 109 against Spitfire and he's extending like that and he's trying to reacquire, he's got time. He's got time. He can climb. He can get his energy back. He can reacquire his target. And he can force a remerge. But with that Fox 2 out there, like, you keep doing that and you're just going to catch a missile up your tailpipe. Fortunately for him, his opponent just really, I don't want to be mean to anyone, but just to be, like, very, brutally critical, his opponent just squandered every single opportunity using the radar like that. I don't understand it. I don't know why you would turn that on unless you've got a sure gunshot and you want help. Honestly, if I'm an F5 pilot, I'd leave that damn thing off. All it does is just let your opponent know that you're about to smoke them. So just turn it off, especially if you have missiles left. Leave it off. You don't need it. Lock them up with the Sidewinders and just smoke them. Leave the radar off. The F5 lost the BFM every time, went low, got slow, had no altitude, no energy, pulled lead way too often, way too eagerly, trying to make shots that he had no chance of making, and then fought the MiG's fight, like tried to go straight into a rate fight. And that just plays to the Mig-19's advantages as I understand them. Enigma would win the BFM, but because he's looking around so frantically, it really, he just kept losing sight of his opponent, and that really led to his downfall in multiple cases, at least 3 different instances, and it could have gotten killed. So this ends up being a victory for Enigma. You guys watching, again, setting up your track IR, making sure it's smooth, and getting a feel for your jet is really key, so you don't have to keep staring at your gauges, especially with these early war birds where you've got steam gauges that are buried at the bottom of the cockpit in these Russian birds, nowhere near your eyesight. Like, you got to fly by feel, and that's hard, and it takes a lot of practice. And so if you want to get good with these types of planes, you just got to practice. Go to a BFM clinic, go to the dogfight server, and just practice over and over again and get a feel for when the jet's going to impact into the ground, when it's not, how it stalls, what it feels at different angles of attack. And as you guys get better with that, you'll have less of an inkling to want to snap your head forward and take your eyes off your target, because especially if you're not in VR, or even if you are and you have a different opinion, but it's hard to keep eyes on people in DCS, especially with an aircraft as small as like an F5. That's in burner too. Like, if he's in burner the whole time, you don't get those big smoke trails either. So you really got to focus on your opponent and try not to lose sight of him. Anyway, again, my name's Tempest 7, or my name's Tempest. You can check me out at Tempest 7 MR on Twitch.
This video was a bit longer than I expected, so I'm going to make my part very short. I just wanted to highlight some pieces very quickly, some key takeaways. The Cold War fights are very interesting in DCS, so much to the point that it makes it especially soul-crushing when you realize how tricky DCS spotting is, because it really limits the accessibility to dive into this genre sometimes. I think this fight was a really interesting one because a few blunders really had some implications that didn't materialize until the end of the fight. I was winning the BFM fight over this F5, but because of my inability to track the target successfully, I was forced to give my tail to find the target again. This forced me having to dig myself out of my own hole. Meanwhile, the F5 was given a golden opportunity, and he squandered it by mismanaging his systems. Or to paraphrase Tempest, the F5's pilot's inability to stop touching his systems. When you think about these missteps and add them all together, this fight really reflected more of a chess match with pieces or missiles being squandered, and the energy situation leaning more and more in favor of the MiG. The F5 just really didn't have any options by the end of the fight. I want to thank the guests for commenting. I also want to remind you that as you're watching this, these videos are only possible if people take the time to comment. So I encourage you to check out all of their socials. Each of them have either a YouTube or a Twitch account or both. And I would encourage you to check it out. You can find all that in the comments and descriptions. Thank you and have a good one.